Welcome, sleepy souls, to the Creepy Night Show. Tonight, I'm here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I would love to know that too.
I never thought I'd be that guy, posting on a forum at midnight, but need to get this off my chest before I lose my mind. This happened during my senior year at a public high school in Ohio. I was the lead set designer for the theater department, which meant I had 24-hour keycard access to the auditorium one Tuesday. I stayed late to finish painting a backdrop. By the time I packed up, it was 3 a.m. The school at night isn't just dark, it's heavy. Every footstep on the linoleum sounded like a gunshot. As I walked toward the side exit, I heard a sound that didn't belong. The rhythmic clicking of a typewriter, IT, was coming from room 212, the old journalism lab. I told myself it was just a radiator, but the rhythm was too human. I crept down the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I peered through the small rectangular window of the door. The room was bathed in a sickly blue light from an old computer monitor. A figure sitting there, back turned to me, hunched over. It looked like Mr. Henderson, the English teacher who had retired mid-semester without saying goodbye. I whispered his name. The typing stopped. Slowly, the figure stood up, but his movements were wrong, fluid, like he had no bones. He didn't turn around. Instead, he started speaking in a voice that sounded like my own mother's. "You forgot to cite your sources, Caleb," the voice rasped. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't told anyone my middle name was Caleb. I went by CJ at school that I bolted for the exit, but as I reached my car, I realized I'd dropped my keys right outside room 212. I looked back at the school's glass front doors. The figure was standing there now, pressed against the glass, but it wasn't Mr. Henderson. It was a perfect mirror image of me, holding my keys and smiling with far too many teeth. The twist: the next morning I went to the principal's office to report a break-in. He looked at me with genuine confusion and pulled up the security footage from the night before. The video showed me walking to room 212, opening the door, and sitting down. I watched myself on screen for 3 hours, typing frantically on a keyboard that wasn't plugged in. At 3:13 a.m., the me on the screen stopped, looked directly into the camera, and mouthed, "He's almost done painting the backdrop." I looked down at my hands. They were covered in fresh, wet blue paint, the same color I had finished using before I ever went to that room. My high school in rural Pennsylvania was built in the 1920s. It had that classic American Gothic look, red brick, ivy, and a basement level that smelled like wet concrete and old gym socks. Most of the basement was off limits, but since I worked on the school paper, I had a pass to use the old darkroom down there. There was a locker, number 402, located right next to the boiler room. It was rusted shut, welded over decades ago. The school legend was that a girl disappeared in '74, and students claimed if you slipped a note through the vent of 402, you'd get an answer. Typical teenage lore, right? One night, while waiting for my film to develop, I decided to be a cliché. I scribbled, "Who are you?" on a scrap of paper and pushed it through the rusted slit. I heard it hit the bottom. Clink! The next night, I went back. There was a piece of paper sticking out of the locker. It was yellowed, brittle, and written in a shaky, fountain pen script. "I am the one who stayed behind. Do you want to see my collection?" I got a rush of adrenaline. I thought it was a prank by the janitor or a senior. I wrote back, "Show me." Over the next week, the collection began. Every night, a new item appeared outside the locker. A silver locket, a cheerleader's ribbon from 1982, a prosthetic glass eye, a set of car keys for a 2005 Ford. The items were getting more modern. Then, I found a Polaroid of my own house, taken from the woods behind my backyard. Panicked, I brought a crowbar the next night. I was going to open number 402 and end this. I jammed the bar into the seam and heaved. The weld snapped with a deafening crack. The door swung open, screeching on its hinges. The locker was empty. No shelves, no hooks. just a dark, narrow hole in the back of the locker that led directly into the crawl space behind the school walls. The twist, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, expecting a ghost or a killer. It was my principal, looking grim. "I told you to stay away from the basement, son," he said. I started rambling about the notes and the locker. He sighed and opened the locker next to it. #401. It was filled with hundreds of notes from students over the last 50 years, all asking the same questions. "The locker isn't haunted," the principal whispered, his voice trembling. "The girl from 74? She didn't disappear. She's been living in the walls of this school for 50 years. And the reason we weld the lockers shut isn't to keep her in. It's because she thinks the students are her collection of children." He looked at the hole in the back of the locker and then at my feet. I looked down. I wasn't standing on the floor. I was standing on a trapdoor that was slowly beginning to unlatch from below. This happened back in 2018 at a high school in a quiet suburb of North Carolina. I was a junior, and like every other kid, I lived for the days we had a substitute teacher. It usually meant a free period or a movie. But when we walked into AP History that Friday, the man sitting at the desk didn't look like the usual retired hobbyist. He was pale, almost gray, wearing a suit that looked 50 years out of style. He didn't write his name on the board. He just stared at us with these unblinking, watery eyes. He told us we wouldn't be following the lesson plan. Instead, he wanted to play a memory game. He started pointing at students and telling them exactly what they had for breakfast, what they argued with their parents about that morning, or the secret fears they'd never told a soul. He pointed at Sarah and told her she was worried about her sister's surgery. He pointed at Mike and mentioned the dent he'd put in his dad's truck the night before. The room went dead silent. It was beyond creepy. It felt like he was reading our souls like open books. When he got to me, he leaned forward, the smell of mothballs and stagnant water filling the air. "You," he whispered, "are the only one who noticed the clock has stopped." I looked up. The wall clock was stuck at 10:15 a.m. I looked at my phone. 10:15 a.m. I looked at the hallway through the door window. Nobody was moving. A student was frozen in mid-stride in the hall like a statue. The entire school had paused, except for our classroom and this man. He told us that time is a filter, and sometimes things from the outside slip through the cracks when the filter gets clogged with too many memories. He stood up, and as he walked, his shoes made no sound on the floor. He started handing out exit slips. He told us that if we signed them, we could leave the frozen second and go back to our lives. Everyone was so terrified, they just signed their names immediately. I was the last one to doubt the twist. I looked at the paper. It wasn't an exit slip. It was a missing persons flyer from 1968, featuring a photo of the very man standing in front of us. He leaned in close to my ear, his breath cold as ice. "Thank you," he hissed. "I've been waiting for a big enough group to swap places with." Suddenly, the bell rang. The school jolted back to life. I looked around, relieved. The substitute was gone, and our regular teacher, Mr. Miller, was standing at the front of the room. I laughed, thinking it was a mass hallucination, until I noticed the seating chart. My friend Sarah and Mike weren't in their chairs. In their places were two kids I had never seen before, wearing 1960s Letterman jackets. Looking around the room with absolute horror, I looked down at my own hands and saw they were starting to turn gray. Then, I noticed the missing flyer on the floor. The photo had changed. It wasn't the old man anymore. It was a group photo of our entire AP History class, dated October 12, 1968. Underneath, it read, "Vanished without a trace." I looked at the clock. It was still 10:15 a.m. It would always be 10:15 a.m.